Ladies and gentlemen, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine stepping into a room, no music playing, no one speaking, but the moment you enter, your heart begins to tremble, not with fear, but with awe. You don't know what it is, but something in the air changes you. You don't want to leave, you can't leave, you just stand there. And something deep inside starts to weep, heal, and breathe again. That is what happens when the Spirit of the living God takes over. And if you've never experienced it, then I beg you don't walk away until this message is done. Because what I'm about to share with you could break chains you didn't even know you were wearing. There's no thunderclap, no fire falling from the sky, but suddenly the bitterness is gone, the addiction loses its hold, the heart that couldn't forgive begins to melt like wax. You don't try harder, you are simply changed. That's what happens when divine power quietly enters a surrendered life. When that presence floods your being, you can't help it. Love becomes who you are. You begin to see people not as problems but as miracles in waiting. Strangers feel like brothers, enemies become missions. That kind of love isn't human, it's supernatural. Ones who were silent find themselves speaking with fire. Not arrogance, but holy boldness. They no longer tremble at the face of darkness. They carry a light that no shadow can overcome. There are moments when sickness flees, when despair lifts like morning fog, when broken bodies and even more broken spirits are made whole. These moments cannot be orchestrated by man. They are the fingerprint of heaven on earth. You walk into a room and it feels like heaven brushed by. People begin to cry for no reason. Others start laughing with joy they haven't known in decades. It's not emotion, it's encounter, a presence so thick, so real, you feel as if the very breath of God is moving through the air. You don't always see it coming. There's no trumpet sound, no spotlight, no announcement. It happens in a moment, often in the quietest places, in the most ordinary lives. But when it happens, nothing is ever the same again. When the Holy Spirit takes over, transformation is not a theory or a theological concept. It becomes your reality. The kind of change that no therapist, no self-help book, no motivational seminar could ever bring. This isn't about behavior modification. This is about heart recreation. The very nature of who you are is touched by a power greater than yourself, and what emerges is someone you never believed you could become. People often ask, how do you know it's real? You know because you feel yourself thinking differently, walking differently, loving differently. You begin to forgive people you once swore you'd hate forever. You let go of things that once defined you, the pride, the fear, the shame, not because someone told you to, not because you were pressured into it, but because the weight of those chains suddenly becomes unbearable in the presence of divine freedom. And you don't just see the change in yourself, you begin to feel it all around you. Atmospheres shift, conversations change, priorities are flipped upside down. The things that used to matter so much suddenly seem so small. That obsession with being right, gone. That thirst for approval fades into irrelevance. That addiction that kept you in a prison for years. You wake up one morning and realize its grip has loosened. That doesn't make sense in the natural. That's not self-discipline. That's transformation beyond understanding. And it's not that life suddenly becomes perfect. No, the pain doesn't always vanish. The storms still come. But you face them with a strength that's not yours. A peace that doesn't make sense. A stillness in your soul, even when the world around you is shaking. You see, when that divine power steps into the core of who you are, it doesn't just clean up the outside, it rewrites the story. The things you thought disqualified you are no longer the end of your story. The failures, the regrets, the secret struggles, they're not edited out, they're redeemed, and somehow the very scars you tried to hide become the evidence of grace, of healing, of the encounter that changed it all. You find yourself loving people you don't understand, serving without needing recognition, giving when no one is watching. You're no longer ruled by ego. You're not building your own name. You're carrying a presence, one that speaks louder than words, one that shifts rooms before you even open your mouth. That's what it means to be taken over. And here's the thing, it doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't require a stage or a spotlight. Sometimes it looks like a mother suddenly having patience she never had before. A husband letting go of anger he didn't know he was carrying. A teenager choosing peace over pressure. A broken man looking in the mirror and seeing hope instead of failure. That's not emotional hype. That's transformation beyond explanation. You can't fake this. You can try to mimic the actions, the words, the posture, but without the presence, it will always feel hollow. Because this kind of change isn't about learning the right script. It's about surrendering, that quiet yes in the depths of your soul that says, I'm done trying to fix myself. Take over, and when you give that yes, something starts to move. It's like the soil of your heart begins to shift. Things that were buried begin to grow. Dreams that died begin to breathe. Desires that were poisoned by shame are purified by grace. And the person you become is not just better. They're reborn. This is not an upgrade. This is a rebirth. People may not recognize you. They'll say, there's something different about you. And you'll know it's not that you got stronger. It's that you got surrendered. You let something higher, deeper, greater step in. And now your life is evidence of what happens when heaven touches earth, when eternity invades time, when the Spirit takes over. So if you're tired of the striving, the hiding, the pretending there's a better way, not a harder way, a higher way, and the invitation is simple, let go. Let go of trying to be enough. Let go of trying to clean yourself up before you step into the light. Let go of the belief that this is all there is, because there's more. There's more than you've ever tasted. And when you taste it, when you let it fill you, when you allow that divine fire to burn away the old and awaken, the new you won't just change, you'll be transformed, and you'll know, without a shadow of doubt, this is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over. There's a kind of love that doesn't come from trying harder, a kind that doesn't originate in human emotion or personal effort. It's not performance, it's not selective, and it's certainly not convenient. This love doesn't wait for someone to be lovable before it embraces them. It doesn't check the background, tally the mistakes, or demand repayment before extending itself. This kind of love pours out endlessly, fiercely, gently. When the Spirit of the living God takes over, when that divine presence begins to move in your life, something changes at your core. Where there used to be judgment, there's understanding. Where there used to be hardness, there's softness. And suddenly, compassion begins to flow from you like water bursting through a dam. You can't explain it, but you feel it. The way your heart breaks for what once annoyed you, the way your arms open toward those you once avoided. It's not something you fake. In fact, it's not something you could manufacture even if you tried. This love does not come from a good mood or a temporary sense of kindness. It is supernatural. It is endless. It is alive. And it's not reserved for a stage or a platform or a Sunday morning. This love shows up in the kitchen with your family, in the car when no one's watching, in the workplace with people who test your patience. It doesn't pick and choose. It doesn't show up only when things are easy or people are grateful. No, this love flows even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts, even when there's nothing in return, because this love doesn't give to receive. It gives because it has no other choice. It flows out of a heart that has been completely overtaken by something higher than itself. A heart that once operated on defense now beats with grace. A heart that once sought to protect itself now opens wide not because it's safe, but because it's surrendered. When the Spirit takes over, love becomes your default language. You don't have to convince yourself to care anymore, you just do. You see someone in pain and your soul leans toward them. You hear someone's story and tears rise without warning. You pass a stranger and you feel a connection deeper than understanding. It's not just sympathy, it's not pity. It's divine compassion, the kind that sees through the mask, hears past the words, and loves through the mess. And you realize something profound, that people don't need your perfection. They don't need your opinions or your advice. They need your presence, your patience, your compassion. They need to feel something in you that reflects heaven, and when the Spirit has taken over, that's exactly what they experience. Not because you're better than them, but because you've been broken too, and love has put you back together. You begin to see others not as categories, not as stereotypes, not as threats, but as people. People with stories, people with battles, people who are, whether they know it or not, deeply loved. You're no longer concerned with being right all the time. You're more concerned with being kind. You stop measuring people by their performance or their reputation and start seeing them as sacred. And it isn't weakness. It's strength under control. It takes strength to love those who don't love you back. It takes courage to forgive people who never apologized. It takes real power to carry peace into hostile places and keep carrying it even when it's not returned. That's not a human strategy. That's a divine invasion. You begin to love yourself, too, not with pride, but with grace. You stop criticizing yourself for every mistake. You stop replaying the past. You stop punishing yourself for not being enough. Because when divine love floods your life, it doesn't just help you tolerate yourself, it teaches you to embrace the truth of who you were created to be. And when that happens, you can love others from a place of wholeness, not lack. This kind of love doesn't just touch the surface, it reshapes everything. The way you speak, the way you listen, the way you respond when you're hurt. It heals the relationships you thought were too far gone. It restores the broken bridges. It gives you the strength to try again and the humility to say, I'm sorry. And even in your weakness, even in your failure, the love doesn't stop. It keeps pouring. It keeps flowing because it's not based on you. It's not sustained by your effort. It's not produced by your strength. It's the result of a heart that's been saturated by the Spirit. That's what happens when the takeover begins. Love becomes more than a word. It becomes your way of life. Compassion becomes more than a feeling, it becomes your mission. You'll look back one day and realize, I didn't get here by discipline alone. I didn't get here by trying to be good. I got here because love took over, because heaven touched earth, and it started with my heart. That is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over. There's a kind of boldness that doesn't come from self, confidence. It doesn't come from personality type or natural charisma. It doesn't come from being loud, educated, or having the right answers. No, this boldness is different. This boldness comes from knowing you're not alone. It rises when you're no longer driven by ego, but led by something far greater, far deeper, far more powerful than yourself. It's the kind of boldness that flows when the Spirit of the living God takes over. It's not the kind that makes noise to be seen. It doesn't show off or dominate. It's not a performance. It's not pride dressed up in spiritual language. This boldness stands firm but bows low. It speaks truth, but does so with tears in its eyes. It walks into darkness without fear, not because it believes it's invincible, but because it knows it's not walking alone. When the Spirit takes over, something incredible happens to the fearful, to the hesitant, to the ones who always played it safe, who always stayed in the background. Suddenly they rise, not to be noticed, not to be admired, but because something inside them can no longer stay quiet. They don't seek a platform. They become a vessel through which a message greater than themselves flows. This boldness doesn't erase humility, it intensifies it, because you know without a doubt that the strength you feel isn't yours. The words you speak aren't rehearsed. The courage that carries you wasn't manufactured. You are aware every step of the way that you are being led by a power you could never produce on your own, and that awareness keeps you low not in shame, but in awe. There's a mystery in this kind of boldness. It doesn't look like the world expects it to look. It doesn't boast or bully. It doesn't need a crowd to validate it. It often moves in silence. It shows up in moments that don't make headlines, in the quiet decision to forgive, in the choice to speak love when hate would be easier, in the courage to tell your story even when your voice shakes. That's the boldness that comes when the Spirit fills a life completely. It doesn't come from memorized speeches or motivational quotes. It's born in surrender, in brokenness, in those moments when you fall on your face, not knowing how to go on, and suddenly feel lifted, empowered, filled with words you didn't plan to say and strength you didn't know you had. And here's the thing, this boldness doesn't come without cost. It may cost you your comfort. It may cost you your reputation. It may cost you relationships with people who don't understand why you've changed. But when you've truly been overtaken by that divine fire, the fear of loss fades, because what you've gained is far greater. You begin to speak with authority, not because you want to be right, but because you've encountered truth. You begin to stand firm, not because you want attention, but because compromise feels like betrayal to the Spirit who lives inside you. You can't pretend anymore. You can't hide. You can't water it down to make others feel comfortable. You carry something too sacred to silence. But even as you carry it, you do so with trembling hands. You don't see yourself as the answer. You don't seek applause. In fact, the more you walk in this power, the more invisible you want to become. Because your deepest desire is not to be celebrated, but that others would encounter the one who transformed you. That others would be healed, restored, awakened. Where you were, that's the paradox of it all. You're bolder than you've ever been, and yet more humbled than you've ever known. You're filled with confidence, but it's not in your flesh, it's in your source. You take risks you never imagined taking, and you do it with tears in your eyes. You challenge what's wrong, but you do it with love in your tone. You stand in rooms you never thought you belonged in, but your heart keeps whispering, "It's not about me." This is what it looks like when heaven empowers humanity, when strength and softness live side by side, when courage and compassion walk hand in hand, when truth is spoken not to crush, but to call people into something greater. And even when fear whispers, even when doubt creeps in, there's a fire inside that doesn't let you quit. A voice within that says, "Go again. Speak again. Stand again." And you do, you keep going, not because you're strong, but because you've been taken over. So if you've felt weak, good. If you've felt unqualified, perfect, because this kind of boldness doesn't require perfection. It requires surrender. All you need is a heart that says, "I'm willing." And when you give that yes, the Spirit will do what only He can do. You'll rise when others bow. You'll speak when others stay silent. You'll love when others judge. And you'll do it all with the quiet, unwavering confidence of someone who knows, "I am not walking alone." This is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over, When the Spirit takes over, you stop seeing miracles as rare. You stop treating the supernatural as something distant. You stop viewing the impossible as unreachable. Because when the atmosphere of heaven fills a life completely, what once seemed extraordinary becomes your new normal. Miracles don't shock you anymore, they surround you. You begin to walk in a realm where the boundaries of natural law no longer limit your expectation. You stop praying safe prayers. You stop hoping timidly. You start declaring what you know heaven has already willed, and it's not arrogance. It's not fantasy. It's a deep, quiet conviction born from intimacy, a knowing that comes not from head knowledge, but from a life fully yielded to the presence that cannot be contained. When the Spirit takes full control, miracles become the natural outcome of His nearness. Healing isn't a rare occurrence. Peace in chaos isn't a coincidence. Provision in lack isn't luck. It's the evidence of a life saturated in divine power. You begin to expect heaven to break into your everyday, not because you're worthy, but because you know the one who is. And where He is welcomed fully, the impossible doesn't stay impossible. The blind begin to see in more ways than one, sometimes with their eyes, sometimes with their hearts. People bound by shame for decades are set free in seconds. Anxiety that ruled a life for years breaks off with a whisper of peace. Addictions that resisted every earthly method suddenly lose their grip in a moment of surrender. That's not psychology. That's not positive thinking. That's the supernatural power of God moving where He is given full access. And it doesn't stop there. Marriages on the verge of collapse are suddenly flooded with forgiveness that didn't seem possible. Families long divided by bitterness come back together with tears and restoration. Bodies that doctors had given up on start responding in ways science can't explain. You don't argue about it, you witness it. You don't need to defend it. It defends itself by what it produces. The miraculous becomes familiar but never casual. You never stop being in awe, but you stop being surprised. It's not hype, it's not emotion, and it's not entertainment. It's heaven meeting earth, and when you've tasted it once, you can't go back to normal living. You hunger for it. You live in anticipation. You learn to walk slowly through your day, always listening, always watching, because you never know when a miracle will unfold right in front of you. And sometimes it's the smallest moments that carry the greatest miracles. A word in season that turns a suicidal thought into a renewed purpose. A whispered prayer that melts years of pain. A seemingly random encounter that shifts the course of someone's entire life. Miracles are not always loud. Some are quiet, hidden, subtle, but they are just as divine. When the Spirit has full reign in a life, you don't chase signs, you carry them. You become a living intersection where heaven and earth collide. You don't just go to revival, you bring it. Supernatural solutions begin to flow through your ordinary obedience. You say yes, and God moves through it. You lay hands, and something invisible becomes undeniably real. You speak, and words land like fire, not because they're eloquent, but because they're anointed. And the best part, you begin to realize it has nothing to do with how qualified you are. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to be famous or polished or impressive. You just have to be available. Miracles are not reserved for the spiritual elite. They're for the surrendered, for the ones who say, I have nothing, but I give you everything. And He takes that offering, He breathes on it, and what comes out of it? Your life begins to look a lot like the Gospels, not because you've mastered the techniques, but because the same Spirit that hovered over the waters, that raised the dead, now dwells inside of you and has been given the freedom to move. You begin to live with a new lens. You stop seeing problems as final. You stop seeing death as the end. You look at barren places and expect gardens. You look at broken people and expect beauty. You look at your own pain and expect it to produce glory. That's not delusion. That's what happens when the miraculous becomes your atmosphere. You're not chasing moments, you're living in one. You're not waiting for heaven to show up, you're walking with heaven within you. And when that becomes your reality, miracles follow naturally, not because you force them, not because you deserve them, but because he has taken over, and wherever he is, the supernatural flows like breath. So if you've been told to expect less, don't. If you've been taught that miracles are rare, unlearn it. If you've settled into a version of faith that feels safe but powerless, it's time to wake up. There's more than sermons, more than routines, more than inspirational quotes and weekend experiences. There is power, there is presence, there is wonder, and when the Spirit takes over, the miraculous becomes your everyday. When the Spirit truly takes over a life, the first and most undeniable change happens in the unseen places. Before the miracles, before the boldness, before the outward display of power, there is a work so deep, so thorough, that it shifts the very core of who you are. It's not performance. It's not behavior modification. It's not about looking more spiritual. It's transformation from the inside out. There comes a moment when you realize that all your striving, all your pretending, all your trying to impress or earn approval, it's hollow. You can serve, you can preach, you can sing, you can do all the right things and still be empty inside. You can be applauded by people and yet feel far from the presence that actually brings life, and so many live like this, exhausted, hidden, worn out by the pressure to keep performing. But when the Spirit takes over, that exhausting cycle breaks. You stop living for the spotlight. You stop needing the approval of others to feel worthy. You stop using spiritual activity to hide from the fact that your heart is aching for something real. And in that raw, surrendered place, the Spirit begins his most powerful work not around you, but within you. He doesn't start with what the world sees. He starts with what you don't want anyone to see. The hidden wounds, the quiet bitterness, the fears you try to mask with busyness, the shame you cover with perfectionism. He goes there, not to shame you but to heal you, not to expose you but to restore you. And when he does, everything begins to change. You no longer feel the need to pretend. You no longer lie with two versions of yourself, one for public, one for private. Integrity becomes your anchor, not because you're trying to be impressive, but because truth now reigns inside of you. Your thoughts begin to shift. Your desires begin to purify. You begin to want what heaven wants, not because you're told to, but because you've been changed. You start to walk in peace that doesn't make sense. The kind of peace that isn't based on circumstances, but on identity. You're no longer driven by anxiety or comparison or insecurity. You're no longer fighting to prove your worth because you've encountered the one who called you worthy before you ever did a thing. This transformation is slow sometimes, but it's sure. You might not even notice it at first, but the people around you will. They'll see the way you react differently, the way you don't gossip like you used to, the way you carry grace into places you once carried frustration, the way you're no longer triggered by every offense because your ego isn't running the show anymore. You'll start to see it in your conversations. They become deeper, more meaningful. You'll feel it in your prayers, no longer a checklist, but a communion. You'll sense it in your choices, not just avoiding sin, but longing to live in a way that honors the presence that now governs your soul. This isn't self-help. This isn't therapy with religious language. This is supernatural renewal. It's not your effort. It's not your discipline. It's the Spirit doing what only he can do, rewriting your inner world, so that what flows out of you is pure, authentic, and lasting. And here's what's beautiful. As your inner world changes, so does your impact. Not because you're trying harder, but because fruit flows from healthy roots. When love rules inside you, it shows up around you. When joy lives in your heart, It leaks into every room you enter. When your identity is grounded, you stop tearing others down to feel better. When you're healed within, you begin to bring healing without. The greatest move of God in your life is not how loud you shout, how high you jump, or how many people follow you. It's how much you love when no one's watching, how much patience you show when you're under pressure, how much peace you carry when everything's falling apart. That's the true evidence of a life transformed, and that's what Spirit is after, not just your gift, but your character, not just your actions, but your motives, not just your title, but your heart. He doesn't want you to perform, he wants you to become, not a better version of yourself, but a reflection of the one who lives within you. That's why when he takes over, it doesn't just feel like a moment, it becomes a process. You keep changing, you keep softening, you keep growing. You find yourself repenting quicker, forgiving easier, worshiping deeper. You stop waiting for the next big spiritual moment and start valuing the daily moments where he meets you, teaches you, molds you. This inner transformation becomes your greatest testimony, because people can argue with your beliefs, your theology, even your miracles, but they can't argue with your fruit. They can't deny the gentleness, the wisdom, the kindness, the purity that flows from someone who's been with God. And so if you're tired of performing, let him take over. If you're tired of faking, surrender. If you're hungry for something more than spiritual appearances, ask for the real thing. He doesn't want perfection. He wants permission, and once he has that, transformation begins from the inside out. This is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over. When the Spirit truly takes over, something unseen shifts before anything seen does. You might still be in the same room, facing the same mountain, surrounded by the same mess, but the atmosphere around you begins to feel different. Something intangible but undeniable starts to move. The weight in the room lifts. The fear in your chest breaks. The tension that once paralyzed you begins to melt, and you haven't even said a word yet. That's what happens when he comes in the atmosphere. Changes first. We often pray for situations to change. We want answers. We want results. We want the breakthrough. But when the Spirit takes over, he doesn't always begin with the visible. He begins with the environment. He begins with the realm that surrounds your spirit, because when the atmosphere shifts, your spirit does too, and when your spirit shifts, your perception changes. Suddenly, what looked like the end doesn't feel hopeless anymore. What used to cause panic now draws you into prayer, not because the storm is gone, but because peace arrived in the middle of it. There is something powerful about an atmosphere that has been invaded by the presence of God. It becomes charged with expectancy. The air feels different. You begin to breathe deeper. Your mind quiets. Your heart softens. You stop striving. You stop rehearsing every problem. You stop leaning on your own understanding, and in that stillness you sense something wholly not loud, not flashy, but real. Sometimes that's all you need, not the answer yet, not the miracle yet, but the atmosphere of heaven breaking through the noise of earth. Because when the atmosphere aligns with his nature, everything else starts catching up. Your perspective shifts first, your emotions settle, your faith rises, and then, slowly but surely, your circumstances begin to bow under the weight of the environment you're now living in. That's why you can walk into a hospital room and feel peace even though nothing in the physical has changed yet. That's why you can be in the middle of loss and still feel held. Because when the Spirit takes over, he doesn't wait for things to improve before releasing his presence. He becomes your improvement. He becomes the answer in the waiting. He becomes the calm before the miracle. When the atmosphere changes, so does your response. You stop reacting out of fear and start responding from trust. You stop repeating the language of defeat and start declaring life, even when death tries to speak louder. The presence within you becomes greater than the pressure around you. And suddenly, your prayers aren't desperate cries of hopelessness, they're declarations of faith. Not because everything is perfect, but because you know who is near. When he takes over, your atmosphere becomes a sanctuary, not just in a church building, not just during worship, but in your car, in your kitchen, in your workplace, in that late night moment when you feel completely alone. He fills ordinary places with extraordinary presence, and wherever he is, heaviness cannot stay, confusion cannot linger, darkness cannot dominate. He changes the weather of your soul before he changes the climate of your life, and here's the secret most people miss. You don't have to wait for someone else to create that atmosphere. When the Spirit has full access to your heart, you become a carrier of that environment. You can walk into a place filled with tension and not be overcome by it because you carry peace. You can step into conflict and not be contaminated because you bring clarity. You don't adjust to the temperature around you. You shift it. But this only happens when he has full authority. You can't manufacture this. You can't fake it. It's not the result of good vibes, a positive playlist, or emotional control. This is the weight of glory. This is the residue of heaven, and it lingers. It's tangible. People feel it when they're near you, not because you say anything profound, but because your presence carries the aroma of a deeper one. When the atmosphere is right, miracles are more likely to manifest. When faith fills the room, healing flows easier. When love becomes the oxygen, chains begin to fall. That's why he starts with the atmosphere, because it's the soil for breakthrough. You don't grow fruit in hard ground. You grow it in places where climate supports life, and when the Spirit takes over, he cultivates the climate where the impossible becomes possible. So don't be discouraged if the mountain hasn't moved yet, if the answer hasn't come yet, if the healing hasn't shown up yet. Instead, ask yourself, has the atmosphere changed? I feel his nearness even in the waiting. Has the fear lifted? Has the pressure loosened its grip? Because those are the signs that something greater is already at work, and that the shift in circumstances is on the way. Everything God does begins with presence, and presence always changes the air before it changes the outcome. So make room for him, create space, welcome the change in atmosphere, even when nothing visible has moved, because once heaven fills the air, the rest will follow. This is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over. When the Spirit truly takes over, the loudest voice in your life stops being fear, anxiety, shame, or opinion. It becomes love. Not the kind of love this world throws around carelessly, not the kind that depends on mood or mutual benefit, but the eternal kind. The kind that heals when nothing else can. The kind that confronts without wounding. The kind that never gives up, never backs down, and never runs dry. This love doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't demand to be noticed. It's not boastful or showy, but it changes everything. When the Spirit takes over, love becomes the language you speak, not just with words, but with your presence. It flows in how you listen, how you forgive, how you slow down for people, how you see those others overlook. You don't have to try harder to love. You just become someone through whom love flows naturally. You begin to notice things you used to rush past, the tired eyes behind a smile, the loneliness in a crowd, the pain beneath someone's anger, and you don't look away anymore. You don't guard your heart with walls of self-protection. You open it because you've been loved so deeply. You're no longer afraid to love others the same way. You no longer measure people by their actions, but by the value the Father placed on them from the beginning. Love becomes your default response even in difficult places. You're not easily offended anymore. You don't hold grudges the way you used to. You don't gossip to feel better about yourself. You don't tear down others to prove a point, because when love is the loudest voice inside you, it quiets every other one. The voice of comparison loses power. The voice of criticism grows faint. The voice of self-judgment stops echoing, and all you hear is the whisper, "You are mine, and so are they." This kind of love will wreck your pride. It'll dismantle your judgment. It'll ruin your desire to be right all the time. It teaches you to see like heaven, not with suspicion, but with mercy, not with defensiveness, but with compassion. And you begin to realize that every soul you meet carries eternal value, even the ones who hurt you, even the ones who disappoint you, even the ones you never understood. That doesn't mean you become passive. No love is fierce. It tells the truth. It doesn't enable dysfunction, but it tells the truth with tenderness. It doesn't cut to destroy, it cuts to heal. It doesn't confront shame, it confronts to restore. And in a world that knows how to fight but not how to love, that kind of response confuses people. It silences rooms, it melts defenses, it breaks through where arguments never could. You stop seeing love as just a feeling. You start living it as a force, the kind that reaches across divides, that crosses barriers of culture, language, status, and sin. The kind that drives you to your knees for those who persecute you. The kind that opens your arms instead of building fences. The kind that invites people to experience what you've experienced, not because you have all the answers, but because you carry the heart of the one who does. When love becomes the loudest voice, it transforms your relationships. You start speaking life over your spouse, your children, your coworkers. You stop nitpicking, controlling, withdrawing. You start covering with grace. You start building up with encouragement. You see potential where others see problems. You create safety where others create stress. And it's not because you're just being nice, it's because the spirit within you is loving through you. You can sense it when someone's been overtaken by that kind of love. There's a gentleness about them, a patience, a warmth. They don't have to say much, their life speaks. Their presence feels like home. They're not driven by ego. They don't compete. They don't manipulate. They don't push to be seen. They simply reflect the one who is love. And the beautiful part, it's not limited to a personality type. You don't have to be naturally soft-spoken or emotionally expressive. This love isn't from your personality, it's from his nature. And when he takes over, your temperament doesn't get erased, it gets transformed. Your boldness becomes a channel for truth in love. Your quietness becomes a vessel for peace. Your energy becomes a spark of joy. Love fills every part of you until it becomes the loudest, clearest, most unmistakable thing about you. And in a noisy world, filled with opinions and outrage and endless distraction, that voice, the voice of love, becomes the voice that draws hearts back home. Not to religion, not to performance, but to real life-changing encounter, because love never fails, it never fades, and when it speaks, it doesn't just inform, it transforms. So if you're wondering what the evidence is that the Spirit has taken over your life, look at the way you love. Look at how you speak to the ones who frustrate you. Look at how you treat the ones who can't benefit you. Look at how you carry yourself when no one's watching. Because when he's in charge, the result isn't just power, it's love. And when love is the loudest voice, everything changes. This is what happens when the Holy Spirit takes over. There are sermons that educate, and there are moments that invade your soul. This is not a lecture. This is an invitation. If you're tired of religion without power, if you're done with going through motions without movement, then say this in your heart right now: take over. Because when the Holy Spirit takes over, everything changes. Not someday, not eventually, right now.